Okay.
All right, we're live. Awesome. All right, I'm gonna call our special Board of Education meeting an open session workshop to order. And first, we have some minutes to approve. I move to approve the minutes from the special meeting in open session dated February 26th, 2024.
Second.
Thank you. Did you hear that, Jesse? Board Member Pearson. All right, all those in favor? All right. Board Member Castro, okay, great. That passes 6-0, thank you. Next, I have moved to approve the minutes from the special meeting in open session dated May 6th, 2024. All right,
Someone passed the candy bar.
wait, was that seconded by Board Member Pearson? All right, all those in favor? All right, thank you. That passes 6-0. And next, I move to approve the minutes from the special meeting in open session dated May 20th, 2024.
Second, Maya.
All right, seconded by Board Member Pearson. All those in favor? All right, thank you. That passes 6-0. All right, for tonight, we have two topics. And also just to state, in our open workshops, we do not include public comment, and we don't seem to have anyone here tonight. And we won't be recognizing anybody online. We have two topics, the first being a review of policy. And then we'll move into a discussion of the Forward Career and College Academy Charter proposal that we will be voting on at our regular Board of Education meeting on Monday, February 24th. All right, so with that, I will pass it on over to our policy committee board colleagues.
Okay, thank you. I apologize in advance for my voice. So hopefully those that can online can hear me. So we are going to start today with a policy that we reviewed, the policy 3031 for school closing, inclement weather. Be the first one that we will review. We took a first review of that in our operations work group on January 15, 2025. And so this is our second review per our board policy 1301, in which, depending on how it shakes out tonight, may end up on our regular board on the 24th. We'll vote to either go ahead and adopt it or not to adopt it. And so you have with you, board members, each of the policies. You have the 3031 with the updated changes based on our conversation. You also have here with you the proposed clean version of the policies for your review. And then once we are done with that, we will move on to 4 other policies regarding finance. And at that time, once we are done with this first one, we will move to talk about each one individually, which for those 4, you have the preliminary red line. And this will constitute as our first review. And we'll come back at a later date, depending on how much information we need to update or change. And that will be discussed later with the policy committee.
Just need to correct the record on one thing. The policy committee didn't get through all 4 of the new financial policies. I'm not objecting to that at this time because I already have discussed it, but I do believe the record needs to be clear. State we did not discuss bid policy.
Okay.
And I think that just needs to be clarified for the record.
Okay, if that's the case, I would also like to further clarify that our policy committee gave our legal counsel that is assigned to our policy committee, we agreed to go ahead and kind of go around the policy committee agreements that we all came up with of how we will work through policy recommendations and redlining to bring those things forward to the board. We gave the power to Petra to be able to work back with Bob to get those red lines because it was time sensitive. And unfortunately, we didn't have another meeting prior to this one to be able to discuss in depth that initial red line. So I just wanted to also further clear that up so that everyone understands that. However, Petra did talk with our head legal counsel, Maka, to go through and make sure that everything is legally sound. And so the policies, those other 4 for finance, they have confirmed that they are sound. And so we can still have that discussion and will be considered per 1301 as the first stab for the board to review. Okay, so moving on to the first policy to review, 3031, school closing inclement weather. I think we have Scott maybe believe to review, or do you want to like state like some of the changes and updates?
Do that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, there is one change in 3031. We have in section 5A and B removed references to applicable collective bargaining agreement and replaced that with employee handbook. This is just reflecting a change. We no longer have the collective bargaining agreements, and it's reflecting that the requirements that are set forth here can be found in the employee handbook. So it's pretty straightforward.
And there was no necessarily substantial changes in our last meeting. I think folks were good with that.
Yep.
So open into discussion. Go ahead.
Yes, the only, yeah, the changes seem in accordance with what I remember before. The only thing that is standing out to me this time, so sorry if I didn't catch this before, is in line, item 3 of the policy. It does say that the superintendent will contact the president of the board, as though that is a kind of a process in the queue before determining, and I would say, I don't know if that's a consistent practice, nor do I know if it needs to be. I do think the board generally should be notified, but I don't know if it's specifically the president of the board.
President Nichols, I've operated by informing the board just to avoid calling you at 4 in the morning.
Yeah.
To have the conversation around the decisions. I could live either way, just I want the policy to reflect our practices.
Right, so I think my recommendation would be the superintendent will contact, and unless there's an objection to, it has to be the president, and then the president therefore is then having to use some kind of communication mode to get the word out.
These are weather. Sorry, I'm wrong.
School closing inclement weather.
Okay, inclement weather only. There are other times where we might be consulting around other school closures. Be it any number of things that would happen as well. That might be different. So for inclement weather, I would agree, our teams work many times around the clock.
Right,
And it would be called to inform you that we're watching it, so kind of alert you, or just the decision we made on the information that's available.
is there any objection to that or any thoughts?
I don't have
Board
an
member.
objection. I do have, when we're just updating that language, I think it does need to be clear that the board isn't making the decision to close school.
I agree.
But that it's just because we don't want to make that
You should.
decision, or I don't want to.
Oh, it just means will contact,
Right,
Yeah.
but the way that what you're talking about, the progression in this paragraph,
yeah,
say informing the board of the decision might
Mhm.
be clearer.
Mm,
Distinction for, who's making that
no, it's a good-
of decision.
yeah,
That's a good point. That's a good
I
point.
agree.
So just to be clear, the proposed revision would be the superintendent will inform the board.
yeah, I think that sounds right.
And this is our second read on this policy, and so per board policy 1301, I wouldn't consider these additional revisions substantive. So if everyone's comfortable, you could proceed and move forward with a vote at the regular meeting on this one with the language we've just discussed. The red line will of course be updated and for everyone to see if folks are comfortable with that.
So yeah, we can kind of like take some consensus conversation. So it's sounding like for the most part, most of us are in favor. Blair, I know that you stepped out a little bit. There's a part that the superintendent will contact the president of the board. No, Michelle made the point that maybe it should just be the board, and Jill somewhat agreed. Yeah.
Personally,
I'm fine getting the email. When the school, like, I don't know, the board doesn't make the decision.
Yeah.
I'm not monitoring the weather.
Right,
I don't know why I would need to know in any special way.
right. And Laura made the comment of like, it sounds like based off of the progression, that maybe clarifying some language around, that makes it more clear that we are not the decision makers.
Number 4 says the decision to close schools is made by the superintendent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So I think you were gonna change it, the word.
Yeah, so the proposed revision for that sentence, it would read, the superintendent will inform the board.
Right.
We're good.
Any other comments about that? Do people feel good about that? Thumbs up. Yeah. Yeah, I'm saying pretty much consensus. Thank y'all. We are done with that one. It will come back on the 24th for final approval. Okay, moving along. We're doing great. Bring my board docs. Now we are moving on to district fund balance, policy 6071. I know that this has been a topic that we have discussed a lot in the past in very many different ways. And so Bob is going to let folks know why we are making some of the changes that we are making and the recommendations. Go ahead, Bob.
Right, thank you. So to start off, I'll just kind of summarize what the current policy says. Current policy has a range, 10 to 15%. Current policy says if you fall below the minimum or go above the maximum, or the plan to do to either get you back into board policy at minimum or have a plan on how to spend the fund. 15%. Then, and the proposal that I put in here was to get rid of a range and just go with 17%. That's based on a couple of things. First, primarily, independent audit firm, when they presented to you on the 23-24 audit, they recommended our fund balance policy be changed to 17%. Just a recommendation. We don't have to change this policy at all. Keep 10-15, but that was their recommendation. I did a little searching on the state's publicly available information in terms of fund balance policies. They're really not policies in terms of actual fund balance for the last available year, which would have been 22-23. Statewide fund balance is about 22% of all the 421 school districts, right? But
22% is what people have or what people's policies say?
it's what they have. It's what the numbers are as reported for the unassigned balance.
Great.
Then the other changes really is reflective of going from a range to a number. So you don't have to have a conversation on what you're gonna do necessarily if you're below it. Or you, I've removed the minimum and maximum just to talk about. And then there are some other changes in terms of really updating the language. Since the policy was there, different terminology was used in terms of classification of fund balance. And so, working with the team, we updated the terminology in terms of fund balance categories. Our fund balance, like everyone else, talks about an unassigned fund balance. And so there's really 5 current categories, which is why the language has been updated to be more reflective of what the definitions that EPI has established for discussions of fund balance. One's non-spendable, one's restricted, one's committed, one's assigned, and then the unassigned, which is what the fund balance policy really is all about. So those were the changes in terms of overall.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Any questions about the fund balance proposal? And just to remind everyone, we'll have a second stab at this with updates at a later time. Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, and then, Bob, can you explain, and I'm trying to go back to the Whitley report, but can you explain from your understanding why it would be beneficial to go with the 17% or a fixed minimum versus the range that we've had?
The recommendation of 17%, we talked about that. We're in a time of uncertain financial conditions, both at the state level and at the federal level. And so their process is looking at all their clients and looking at the current research. Their recommendation is to increase that. I'll also add, our budget for 24-25 has about a 17% unassigned fund balance. So that's what we are currently budgeted to be at the end of this fiscal year. And so, if we want to talk about changing that 17% up or down, right, there's implicate, the only consequence is you'll have more money set aside, not allocated out, not appropriated to spend. If you go above 17, less will free up additional funds. Yeah, that's that.
Okay. Ali? She's online, yeah.
Thank you, Board Vice President Pearson. I've said before, I'm not interested in voting in a 17%. I think like it's a real risk to have the bare minimum without any flexibility to spend fund balance at this point, especially given some of the unknowns related to our budget. I am interested in increasing our fund balance policy to between 12 and 24%. And I think that having some level of flexibility as we navigate a series of significant unknowns related to our budget makes sense to me, but I'm not going to vote in favor of a 17% minimum. I don't think it gives us the flexibility to leverage our fund balance. And I worry that it ties the board's hands at a pretty inopportune moment. I also think the 17% that we have, or I think if I go back to our audit conversation, it was actually 18%. I think that changes as the referendum increases in terms of our base. And so achieving that and staying at exactly 17% seems unlikely, in part because we've been outside of our current policy significantly, because we've had more resources. So I do think we want to have a policy that, you know, if the reason we're saving resources is because our schools are not staffed, then I think it's important that our policy dictates that we reinvest that savings into the classroom strategically rather than kind of sit on resources that could really help support an understaffed school. That's it for me.
Thank you, Ali. Any other comments? I see Nikki and then Blair.
I agree with, and like to raise up the comments of, my colleague Ali Moultro. I don't think at this time of uncertainty, the 17% is a good idea. I could understand the 12 to 24 in the future, but I would need one, a lot more discussion, two, a meeting with all the stakeholders, union, non-union in general, and I want to hear from our staff and what they think on our fund balance. I know it affects them as much, even though we're the ones making the decision. It almost feels, and this is probably me and I'm probably misreading it, but it almost feels like the money isn't ours completely. And because of that, I think I need to hear from everybody involved. That's just me, and it's for that reason, not because of Bob or anything else, but for that reason that I couldn't vote for this at this time.
So Nikki, let me just ask just a quick question.
Of course.
Clarify, are you then saying that leave it at the 10%?
Yes.
60% range? Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for the clarification. That really helped.
Okay. Blair? You want this one?
I guess so, okay. The third strikeout does not include the carryover funds utilized annually. That's you're proposing we strike that as like part of like making sure the definitions are clear.
Yes.
Okay.
Wait, where are you, Blair?
It's just in the first paragraph under procedure where it says to define the unassigned general fund balance each year and then the stuff that's struck.
Oh, okay.
I was just asking, like, just trying to get my head around that, and I think I do have that. I will confess, I don't understand why we wouldn't have a range. Like, I don't understand what would be good about that. Like, and I would love to hear what you think would be good about having a number instead of a range.
Wow. Okay. Bob, you wanna go first?
Sure. I don't wanna make any generalizations, but I've looked at a lot of fund balance policies over my career, and I would say more than not have a single target, right? Instead of a range. If the board's comfortable with range, like I said, there's nothing wrong with the range. We have a range. So I think it's more standard to have one number with the recommended, the 17%. We go from a range, right? If they're saying 15 to 70, we could do 12 to 17, right? Go up 2 percentage points on the bottom or leave it. It's really the board's discretion.
Got it. Okay,
What you want.
that's helpful.
Yeah.
And then I guess my other question is, 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs in the bottom. The district shall classify related action in the form of a resolution prior to fiscal year completed. Adding those words, like what is? My assumption is that gives the board greater ability to commit funds without having like a specific budget number. Is that, or like to me, that reads like adding that means we can pass a resolution that says we want to be allocating a number of funds kind of way without getting really specific about it. Is that what that's saying there?
What that language really means to say is the board action is, it would have to be a resolution, right?
I
And
see.
that goes back to the definitions of what committed is. Some of the definitions require an actual board resolution, and that then something different committed, board would have to pass another resolution to say, we want to change that. What that as committed.
So it clarifies what taking action means. Got it. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. That's all my questions. And also I wanted to say congratulations and thank you to the policy team and everyone else who's been working to get this meeting on the books for a long time. Jesse included.
Yay, Jesse, she never gets enough applause on this one.
So I wanted to put that out in the room. Nice work. Thank you.
Laura, go ahead.
Thanks. I have 2 questions for Bob. One is, can you talk about the implications for the district's credit rating as related to the recommended change in the policy?
Yeah, so, 2 things. I'll talk about the credit rating. The credit, first I'll say, Madison has one of the highest credit ratings the district can get, Benson. With a few others that are as highly rated as we are. One of the characteristics, factors the rating agency look at is, does the board have a fund balance policy? And if you do, are you following? So that's the main thing. If you have a fund balance policy, you really need to follow it and bond that we have. In terms of the 17% and quickly, it's conservative budgeting to keep more money in your unassigned balance to handle any unexpected changes in state revenues or federal revenue, right? To be able to make the fiscal year. So increasing that is really what that's about. That answers the questions.
It does. I guess I'm also wondering about the implications for borrowing as related to credit score.
When you maintain a high credit rating, people are more interested. There's more competition for the bonds that we put out for sale. So the higher the credit rating, the better, the lower risk one has, that we're gonna be good on it. We have a good fund balance, we're following the policy. And so what we have to pay in interest to the folks that buy those bonds generally goes down. So if you get a lower bond rating or more of a risk, therefore have to pay people more to buy your bonds.
Okay, so if we compare our current policy with the recommended policy, would you anticipate that would impact our credit rating and therefore the rate of interest for borrowing?
Answer it this way. The credit rating agencies like the fact that we're above our stated policy, because that shows we're being very conservative in our funding in terms of what we're allocating for. And we're keeping our reserves good. So, but I would say in terms of ultimately the biggest thing is, and again, this doesn't mean if we don't hit our fund balance policy, we're gonna be down, right? It's a process. There's a lot of questions, a lot of factors. But generally, you wanna maintain, wanna meet policy. 17%, then, I mean, to me, it's a decision point, it's a consequence. So if we have a policy that's higher than 17% or lower than 17%, then that's not money available to say. Add something to a program, add staff, right? Because that money won't be available to spend.
So then my next question is, I'm wondering if you could respond to the points that board member Mulcho brought forward.
Yeah,
Flexibility.
the only response that I would add is just like put numbers to the numbers, right? Cause I did a little table. Right now, as I said, I compared it to what we have budgeted for 24-25, and what our budget is saying will be about 17. We're gonna get into more changes to that budgeted number at the March operation work group. But so if we go to a high end of 24%, our fund balance goes from 86.3 to 122.1, which would mean $35.8 million more in fund balance. The high end. On the low end, 12% would be 61 million, which is 25.2 million less than we currently have budget. In terms of the range, again, current policy is 10-15. It's really a board discretion on what range you're comfortable with.
Okay, I'm gonna follow up with one more question, then I'll pass it along. So we may be entering a very turbulent time regarding funding that traditionally we've been able to count on. What are the implications? And I'm talking about board members, those comments about flexibility and being able to access funding. Is if we were to have a situation where suddenly we didn't have the same money coming in that we're expecting, are we able to access this money in case of an emergency if we have the policy set as described as a 17%?
The money would always be there, right? But if we would have to access it and go below the fund balance policy, we would want to be explaining why we went below the fund balance policy. I would talk about how we don't want to do that. We figure out some other options. But the money's always, right? It's in our fund balance, it's our money, and it's there. It's just, we would need to take, say, we're at 86.3 million now, we need to take 20 million and redraft down with it. And we're still within our range, right? 10 to 15%. We're okay. 10%, by the way, is 50 million or 35 million, 35.4 less than what we're at in terms of the lower range. I think it's important consideration, right? We've talked about this right now in our budget, 24-25, we have budgeted $37 million in federal revenues. We've sought reimbursement a little over 7 million. So if the feds all of a sudden said, the money that's been appropriated by Congress, the money that's been approved to spend by DPI and Department of Education, we're not gonna give it to you, right? That would create a literal $30 million hole in the budget. So you either cut expenditures by 30 million, which is next to impossible to do in the middle of fiscal year. You'd have to go to your fund balance to cover it. Which I'm pretty sure the rating agencies would say, that's a legitimate reason. Because the money's been appropriated. But I'm not a rating agency.
Thank you. Yeah.
He still wants to go.
Okay, Sabian, I saw your hand earlier. Do you still want to comment?
I'm still getting the question, if you could come back to me.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Michelle?
Yes, thank you. I think one of the things I'm trying to balance is technically, the way I've always understood our fund balance is it's the savings account. I'm putting it in my own layman's terms. It's the account that you are holding like a savings account, your rainy day fund so that you always have something in reserve for the unexpected. And with that orientation, I could see how, especially given the climate that we are in and the uncertainty, it would seem smart to say, let's make sure we're holding some money in this rainy day fund because we don't know what to expect. And so when I see that the Whippley folks are saying at minimum, you should have 2 months of general operating funds to cover any of your expenditures in case something were to happen, and that tends to be around 17%. I could see why you might move in this direction. So I understand that, and I know that we've always had the range, and the range has allowed us to kind of draw down out of the rainy day fund to make some critical investments when we felt it was necessary. I don't think, I'll speak for myself, I don't think that's a long-term practice of always using the fund balance to like kind of make up your annual operating budget. But I think we've been in a fortunate position over the last few years that we've been above at a time of our own policy, and it's allowed us to make some critical budget moves. So it seems like one of the advantages of maximizing the minimum is it kind of forces us to really kind of save and use the fund balance for unforeseen circumstances. The disadvantage going to a single number and kind of raising the bar on that minimum is it seems like we don't have as much flexibility. So do you have I guess what I'm wondering, Bob, is if we could be closer to where the recommendations are, but still using a range. Do you have like a range that you think would keep us closer to the recommendations, but also honor the need for maybe some flexibility that we can't foresee right now? I'm sorry to put you on the spot. If
Yeah.
you
No,
don't.
I talked to my keeper about that, right? We're 10-15 is the range right now.
Right.
Whiffley's saying should really be 17. So one could look at it. They want us to increase that 15 to 17, which means then the range would go to 10. Well, so we keep the same 5-point range, but we go 12. That's a possibility, and we talked about it. But as I've shared with the board before, my preference is to have one target number, right? Another benefit of us being projected at 17% instead of 15%, right, which is the difference between 15 and 17, is about $10 million. And so the last few years, we've had to borrow about 60 million, a little over 60 or a little over 60 million short-term borrowing to make our bills because of the state aid delay. This year, we only are paying for 50 million, right? And we had that opportunity because we have more money in, as you said, President Nichols, in our savings account, right? We had additional funds available, no reason to borrow $60 million and pay the interest on that 60 million when we can achieve what we need to achieve by just 50 million, right? We couldn't have done that if we would have been fund balance percent budget, right? We wouldn't have had the funds available.
Okay,
So that's another a benefit, right, of not having to borrow as much short term, you know, with the 1 year notes. But the consequence is you have to have that money there, right? in
Yeah.
Fund.
yeah, exactly, okay. I don't have a better suggestion on a red line, but I appreciate the context.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Nikki.
I think that this will look reactionary. That we're doing it expecting there's going to be a problem. And I understand the need to have reserves. Do not get me wrong. But I think part of the reason you have reserves is also to have that flexibility. And I don't think by trading the false sense of security, we're really becoming more secure. In fact, I think we're giving both flexibility and security at the same time, and that's what I'm really, really concerned about. But that's my last comment on the subject.
Sabian, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, one comment that I'm kind of noticing in the conversation is that, or kind of tension in the conversation is there's kind of two buckets for what the fund balance is for, kind of schools of thought. One is like a rainy day fund, and then one is it's a tool to help smooth out the cash flow things for the district to function throughout the year. And so while I'm chewing on this, whether it be maybe increasing the range or settling on a target number, Bob, I'm wondering, kind of narrative wise, for the past few years, we have engaged in either deficit spending or using one-time funds to cover ongoing expenses through the federal relief funds and stuff. So, and it's been a goal of ours to stop doing that. So I'm wondering how this policy fits into meeting that goal.
Good question. That target of what we budgeted at 17%, right? We've been higher on that, but because of the expenditures that the board approved, we need $23 million from our fund balance to cover that. So, now we're gonna work on getting that number updated at the March operations work group, but, if we would have been, if our expenditures would have been matching our annual revenues, we would have had a $23 million more in our fund balance. But we needed that $23 million because we need a balanced budget. So we approved higher expenditures and annual revenues, and we need 23 million of that savings account, our unassigned balance, to balance this year, right? Again, I've shared, I think we're on a track to be better than that. That is, we're not gonna need a full 23 million, I don't believe, to end this year positive. It's gonna be something less than that, and we're working on those to present in March. Does that answer it?
Yeah. And yeah, there's just some observations in that, like any point throughout the year, our fund balance percentage can be anywhere in that range just because of the nature of how we use it to cover expenses throughout the year. So trying to weigh these things and, when is the date that, what's the date that matters for what the fund balance has to be at, if that makes sense? So, those are some things that I
It's
just want to
June
remind.
30th. And
Okay.
that's why it's a little dangerous to think of our fund balance as a savings account, because we do not have $86 million sitting in a savings account, right? Matter of fact, we'd be negative right now if we wouldn't have our 50 million short-term loan, right?
Exactly.
So it's a point in time, it's a snapshot calculated on June 30th. And then it is just a calculation, right? It's an important calculation, but it does have some cash, but it's not a constant number, right? It's a calculation at the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. And as we continue to discuss this, I hope that helps conceptualize what this is. So thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Savian. Go ahead, Nikki.
Sorry, my brain comes up with weird ideas, but what I'm worried about, and my big thing is that the future, this lack of flexibility and the tying of the board's hands away will be used as a way to say, well, we don't have the full revenue picture, so we can't do COLA because we can't provide it, or we can't fund Black Excellence because we can't provide it. How do we prevent that from happening?
Who are you directing that?
Anyone who wants to take it.
Well, I think anytime. The budget is priorities. So we have to, the board sets the priorities. Administration makes recommendations to fulfill those priorities. And we have to work together to do that. If we were ever in a position, and this has happened to me, where we have a fund balance number that's set, and if we have to go below that, I've had to waive a fund balance policy before to have a budget passed for that year. I would hope that we would never be in that situation, that we're making other strategic moves so we can avoid ever having to do that. But there would be ways to make sure that we can both comply with the priorities and use our budget policies to close our budget appropriately.
I just don't want to, what my fear is that we're not going to be able to have the nimbleness to do so. And then with the uncertain funding and then go, oh, we can't do our priority actions, which this board has prioritized. Those are the kind of things I worry. Maybe it's just me, I'm a worrier by nature, but those are things I need spelled out, that it's not gonna be used that way, because I don't think that that's what taxpayers necessarily want. But I could be wrong. I'd love to hear from.
Go ahead, Laura.
Okay, so I've really appreciated hearing everybody's perspectives. I feel like I'm prepared to support the changes as suggested in the redlined version. And part of that is I'm thinking about listening to the news about other school districts in the state and how fortunate we are in not having had to cut major programs, staffing, and be looking at closing schools. And I think we are fortunate, one, because our community has been incredibly supportive, and two, because we have been fiscally conservative consistently for a really long time, and that has served us really well and puts us in a position to not be in a state of emergency with budget right now. And I feel like we're at a good moment to say, let's make sure we try to stay that way. And I feel like that's when I'm reading this and when I'm thinking about the implications of just making sure we've got a little bit more put aside for when we need it, because I suspect that we probably will have an emergency or two over the next few years. I appreciate that we could be thinking in advance and be prepared for that. I also just want to say, when I read the wording should hold a minimum of 17%, even though I'm hearing Bob talk about this as a target number, I'm thinking of that as a range because it's 17 and up. So it's not exactly a target number. It's a range that starts at 17. So there is some flexibility in that, in perspective.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our colleagues for the conversation. Is there any final thoughts before I just ask the question? Okay.
That we weren't voting on.
No, I'm just asking a question.
Oh, okay.
Just final thoughts.
Oh, I misunderstood.
Yeah.
I thought you said call the question and I got,
No, I.
sorry about that.
Yeah, I appreciate like all the conversation. And it has me thinking about, in a perfect world, what do we consider as like frequency that we should be coming back, kind of looking at this? Because what I'm also thinking about is that we can plan, you know, for next year and maybe the next 4 years, based off of how things are going. And it's still a policy that we get to control. So then, like, what is the recommendation? Like, if we decide to right now be very conservative, go forward with this proposal, what is the recommendation of like coming back and maybe like reassessing where we're at and maybe changing the proposal or doing the range, or we find out that, you know, this isn't gonna be the best. And so just in a perfect world or not a perfect world, just what's the recommendation of what you've seen or thoughts about that?
Don't think there would be anything, Vice President Pearson, I don't think there would be anything to prevent the policy work group to take this up
Mhm.
however they see fit. If the situation would arise, or if there is some sort of unforeseen condition where we'd say, wait a minute, we just didn't predict this. We know what the last 5 years was like. But I think that it's important that we get a policy written so that Bob and his team can begin to plan on this.
Mhm.
To me, it touches the entire organization.
And from my perspective, if you wanted to impact the 25-26 budget, right? We start having a preliminary budget in May and we would be voting in June on the final preliminary budget. So if you wanted to impact those discussions, then obviously that would be a time. It doesn't have to impact that, right?
Mhm.
It can go, with conversations for as long as you want it to. But
Okay. Thank you for answering that. And so it sounds like we're in a place where folks are marinating on the conversation. I think Petra has been taking extensive notes to be able to come back with Bob and update in a new red line. And pardon?
Can I clarify something? really
But
quick? Yes, I know, it was stated we gave legal permission. I don't give legal permission
legal permission to do what?
for anyone to advocate outside of the board president on my behalf. You stated earlier in the meeting that we gave the permission to advocate for us and to speak for us. I am rescinding it.
So let me clarify what I said. I said that you and I and Petra, we had a conversation together and we agreed together as a policy committee to allow Petra to work with Bob to get the redlining together so that we can be prepared for tonight's meeting. And so that's what I said. And it's not necessarily that Petra is advocating. We have this time to discuss, which we have. We have another.
I meant in the future. Outside this meeting. I thought it was permanent. That's what I was checking.
No, we didn't change any kind of like process. We just
That's what
allowed.
I
her
wanted to make sure.
To be able to do it, and we'll discuss again the process. in our
That's what I
community.
needed to make sure.
And
Because if the case, then that's the way but I respect how you run meeting you've done.
I appreciate that, Nikki. And we've had the conversation
I know.
earlier,
I agree.
that we will discuss the process together as a committee. So I just want the public to be clear
Oh, absolutely.
that there are not side decisions that are being had, that we are having conversations together as a committee. Okay. So Petra will work back with Bob to update this based off of our conversation, to bring it back to us again, and we'll try to work on a date to bring it back, depending on how much time it takes to update that, and we'll let the board know when we are able to get it scheduled again for the second review of the second red line. Yeah.
Can I, so what I heard in the conversation though is there's some board perspective on, I'm okay with the single target number, because it is, minimum means there is a range. It's just not stated what the maximum of the range is, right? And then other board members are saying, I still want a range. But I don't, we haven't given specifically, I mean, a board member may have given a low and a high. But there's still some sentiment around a range feeling still important.
Yeah.
So I think for the policy committee, do you feel like you have enough to work with to even do a second headline? Given that we aren't necessarily in consensus on, are we going with a range or are we going with a target number? If we were going with a range, what would be the minimum? What would be the maximum? Like, I kind of feel like we're still all digesting and thinking out loud, but do you feel like you have what you would need to move forward?
I don't.
Okay.
Well, and just to be clear, my role, especially with something like fund balance, I'm not an expert in this. Bob is, I'm really supporting him in revisions, and yes, I have been taking notes, and
Yeah.
that's so that, you know, when it comes time to do revisions on this, and I don't have a sense that we're in a place for that, but I would defer to Bob. But then we have a record of like where everyone has landed, so I don't know.
I don't have a sense of where the board really wants to go on the next one. I would say if I would take all the comments, I'd say should have a range. If Whipley said go 17 and we're currently at 15 and that's our new max, then I would say the range from 10 to 15, 12 to 17. That covers the spectrum, but I'm just kind of surmising, but clearly I have no direct.
Okay.
Go ahead, Blair.
What do you like? Further conversation in another policy meeting is what would get us to more information. Something that would be helpful for me would be, like a little bit, like where I could go for like a little bit more information about how other districts think about this, or, you know, Whipley says one thing and that's helpful. What else do people say? Who are they? That would be helpful for me.
Yeah, that would be.
Just to like deepen my own understanding.
I could put a table together on a slide of this is what 12 to 17 means, this is what 12 to 24 means in terms of. If our budget balance is 6 and it is, what does that mean?
Definitely don't want to overburden. But if that feels like something you can do straight ahead, like you're the expert and you know this and can make that clearer for me, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, sure, like I said, what's publicly available is 22, 23 because. You know, boards, municipalities have to now to clear that all up, so DPI won't put 23, 24 updates for later this spring at the latest. Probably summer, but you know, late spring, early summer, but I can take a look at that. Boards really range. There are boards that have fund balances 100%, 110% of what they spend every year. right?
Wow.
There are also boards that have no fund balance. So it is a big range, and I can maybe pull some of that
Yeah.
summary statistics statewide. Larger districts, smaller, that kind of thing.
That would be cool.
I'll just say, this feels very arbitrary at this point. You threw out a potential range of 12 to 17. Bob, as one scenario. And I think in my mind, I was thinking if we went with a 15 to 22. It's still a 5 percentage point range. It takes our last maximum and kind of makes it the new minimum, which is close to the 17%, but still a little lower. And then it gives us some, but again, it feels very arbitrary without, besides just using 5 percentage points in a range. I don't, so yes, I think some additional information would be helpful, and hopefully we can help narrow this down.
Yeah.
For the policy committee. Cause I think it would be hard for you all to move forward.
Yeah.
Based on this conversation.
Yeah, and again, we can talk about this policy as many times as we want. If we are, I mean, of course, I don't want to talk about 100 times, but if we need to talk about it as many times to get to where we are all feeling like this is a good policy and we can move forward, we will continue to have that conversation. And our process right now for the policy committee, is something that we are still working through. And this is like the first policy special meeting that I've ever had while I'm being on the board, right, in my 4 years. So, I think we can definitely take back, some of the feedback, like providing maybe some extra information and maybe trying to figure out how we can add that in the process as we deliberate and get information back to the board so that they have. And we'll discuss more of like where that might live, whether it's like in our operations work group, bringing it forward there, just as like information to help folks kind of like digest it more, to ask questions, and that's just a recommendation. But we can talk further, as a policy committee of how that might come back up, not necessarily for the second review, but
Can I just clarify?
Yeah.
Bob made a comment earlier that if we wanted the fund balance policy to impact or be utilized in our 2025-26 budgeting process, what would be the timeline for our fund balance policy to be officially approved in order for that to happen?
Ideally, we'd have it taken care of before we started May, because May's kind of when I'll do the operations work group about. This is kind of the last conversation we're gonna have before we put that preliminary budget for you to vote on. And
Okay,
remember, if you increase the fund balance policy, that has consequences because you're taking revenue and it's not gonna be available to appropriate for some other purpose. Has to stay here
okay,
in the balance.
yeah,
So. Or we just go with the 10 to 15 and do the 25-26 budget that way. I won't come into play again until my 6-27.
got it. All right, thank you.
Okay. Bob, do you feel like you have a sense maybe, and maybe what we can do now is just, get the update, and just kind of go from there as far as like what, and have a conversation with the policy committee of like how we want to present it to the board options, and discuss further maybe how we're gonna bring it back to y'all to discuss. So any other questions right now on this policy right now? Great, thank you. Moving on to policy is 6242, the bid practices for supplies and equipment. And Scott's gonna go ahead and take it away for us to start the conversation, the changes. And Bob can also.
Yeah, the 6242 is the only change we're talking about. Is the purchasing procurement team has been moved to my team and is no longer in administrative services. So it's just merely specifying our contract manager as the entity that's responsible to lead, maintain, direct regarding. That's all that changes. 6242.
Giving folks just the time to kind of look at it, digest it.
Maya, correct me if I'm wrong, that's the only red line in it, right?
Yeah.
And to make sure, 100% sure.
Give it the 20 seconds. Any questions after kind of just a quick glance at it with that one change? Pretty straightforward. Okay, so seeing none. We'll move forward.
Actually, one
Right.
second, actually, I did think of one. Just this, so The administrative services doesn't have a problem with this switchover, do they?
Absolutely not.
Then, cool, that was my only question.
We did it before Scott was hired, so
Perfect,
not a problem.
then cool.
Okay, thank you.
That was-
That's a good question. Okay, move into policy 6244 to procurement.
There's only one related red line. This is a consideration to change contract amount that's required to go to the board.
Yeah.
So. And I've done my research and I know this has been the issue the board has talked about, they're interested in.
It was 7 years ago.
So the work I did with my staff was we picked 50,000. We tried to do a little survey of districts around us and large urban districts are in terms of their policy. Milwaukee is at 50,000. Now, Green Bay, Sun Prairie, and Verona are at 250,000.
Whoa.
Contract has to be 250,000 before it goes to the board. In between that range of 50 to 250 is Wauwatosa's at 84,000. Sheboygan are at 75,000 or above. Kenosha also has 50,000. Middleton has 100,000. Wauwatosa has 84,000. Kind of give you a sense of the.
It's all over.
So I went with the low number, knowing this has been an issue where the board doesn't really like to go too high on this, so I went with 50,000 and talked to the staff saying, well, Milwaukee's doing 50,000. Kenosha's doing 50,000, let's go 50,000. We think it should be raised, obviously, but I didn't think you'd go for the 250 red lines.
Yeah, that's,
I entertained putting it down at 250. I didn't think Petra would let me get away with it.
yeah. Okay, I see, Ali's hand, Nikki's hand, and Blair's hand.
Bob, what is Monona Grove at in terms of their consent agenda?
I do not know. I can I'll look into that. It's a surprisingly not an easy number to always get down by just doing online searches, so, but I'll definitely check that.
I'm deeply curious, and I guess I wonder if there's anything to be gained in terms of caution related to the board's ability to oversee cash flow management. And, I think there's some nervousness around, if I agree with you. I think over 50,000 is reasonable, just given the size of our budget and the amount of work it generates to bring everything over $50,000 to this board. And still, I think that there is some real consequences for a board letting their budget get away from them.
Thank you, Ali, for that. Go ahead, Nikki.
I think, to no surprise, I am against this. I think this will further weaken the board. Because contracts people vote for their elected official. They don't vote for their administrators. They, very, very simply, the board is in charge of making budget decisions. We hire the superintendent. We have a limited role in certain areas. I respect that. I understand that. But when the contract doesn't even go to the board, yet the board is held responsible for the actions of that contract that they may have absolutely nothing to do with. Let's take the mascot, for example. That we will have nothing to do with, yet the number of emails and things that board members have been asked regarding that when we have absolutely no say in it whatsoever is other than, for example, with the large contract portion. I really think that 50,000 is too high, that 35,000, anything under 35,000 would be too low. I'm sorry, I don't think business could be done. And I think 35,000, the most I could see is 40. Because I think that the taxpayers have a right to know how their money is being used. And I think that part of that is the give and take between the board and administration. And I think that needs to be done in a manner, when I first came on the board 7 years ago, sorry, this is a long chair. But when I first came on the board 7 years ago, we had too many. Oh, God, I'm sorry. I'm a leader. We had too many things of board involvement. I'm agreeing with that 100%, because you couldn't do the normal course of business. I think we finally struck a balance where people could understand it at 35,000. To raise it to 50, especially after a referendum where people are like, I trusted you with the money. I trusted you with this. I'm showing you this, and I get that. I think we followed absolutely all our obligations and are doing it well. What I'm afraid of is people aren't going to understand it. And people are going to see the words 50,000 and say, see, they're just using it for their own gain. I don't know how we can explain it, but I think that would be a serious problem, press-wise and publicly. That's why I'm against it.
Thank you, Nikki. So are you then proposing to keep it at the 35?
35 at most, raised to 40 if I absolutely had to.
Thank you. Blair and then Shep.
If I understand, like, inflation between now and that time, this was proposed gets us about 40, just with inflation. I think 50 sound reasonable and I would support that change.
Thank you. And Michelle. And then Laura.
Yes, I was gonna say, I also support raising the minimum to 50,000. I literally, as we were here talking, just went back to our January board meeting. I opened up all of our consent items. And of all of the items that we approve as a board, there were, from what I can tell, only 2 items that would have been under 50,000. One was ordering paper for printing. That was under 50,000, but it still hit the threshold that needed to come to us. And then one was our partnership with 100 Black Men of Madison. That was under 50,000, but over the 35,000, so it did come to us. And I know we fluctuate month to month, but in last month's board meeting, we didn't pull any of those items. We approved them. So I think the only thing, if we go to 50,000, is for the smaller, for the amounts that are less than the 50,000 that we would no longer see. What is is there some other way that the board would have a sense of, like, let's just say like the 100 Black Men partnership, like how would we know that those things have continued? Because I think sometimes our partnerships with community-based organizations, sometimes, not always, sometimes those may be at a slightly lower amount. And so just curious how the board would know about any of those ongoing partnerships or contracts, just in case we were contacted at a later point.
So my recommendation would be that we're even going to be doing an update on partnerships. For
Okay,
the most part, most of the time we focus on high intensity, but the shift would just be to provide an update on all the partnerships that we have within the district, so the board would know the partnerships that we're low, medium, high.
along with the approved contracts?
Correct.
Okay,
Like we could just provide you with the information so you know what partnerships are ongoing for your team.
Well, and under board policy, the board is supposed to be approving medium and high intensity partnership.
Right.
Mhm.
Low intensity doesn't require that, so that would just.
So that's
leave
something
low
you just added low, but it's in one. And get it to a cadence of doing it like on a yearly basis from the beginning, so you would kind of know like what those partnerships were from the very beginning versus like that.
okay. how would this policy impact, would it impact the donations? Or is that a separate policy? Cause I do see that in our consent agendas, we often are approving donation amounts per policy 6177.
Different policy,
So those would still come forward to us.
Correct.
Okay,
unless you shifted that policy to address the.
okay, got it.
Okay, I see Laura's hand and Sabian's.
Okay, so Blair and Michelle, you basically answered both of my questions. Which was kind of crazy.
Okay.
But I am curious about, I was thinking about the rate of inflation. For the original policy in 1998, what was that?
Good question.
Was it?
Oh, yeah.
Right, like, I'm wondering if we have not at all actually kept up with the pace of inflation.
Yeah.
So it's a curiosity, I guess I don't need to know, but I'm glad to know that we are seeing that this is even below the rate of inflation from the last update. And I was also wondering about the percentage of consent items this tax. Was there any actual analysis? Yeah.
Information. This is slightly above 50, is slightly above what the inflation would have been between 2020 and now.
Okay,
I was responding to board member Van der Meulen's 40,000 number.
oh, okay.
I just used a calculator, but it looked to me like if inflation between 2020 and now is 22%,
Yeah,
it would be like 40, like almost 43.
thank you for,
Sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to make that point of clarification.
no, that's helpful. So, and then I am wondering, I know it's a big lift to put together the consent item memos. And so I appreciate that this would take a little bit of that administrative burden off. But I am wondering, like how much of a burden does this actually relieve? And so I don't know if any analysis was done to look at other than in last January for the fund, like,
I can pull those numbers.
Yeah,
I don't
it-
have.
you know what, don't worry, about it. I'm gonna agree with. It's fine.
Actually, I'd like to see.
Nikki, excuse me, I'm sorry. What'd you say?
I said I'd like to see it if it's not too much trouble. If it's too much trouble, don't do it. If it's a minute, like a 5-minute thing, then do it. If it's more than 5 minutes, please don't do it because your time is much more valuable than that.
Right, Can we
Does that make sense?
clarify like what you're asking then?
I just wanted to see what the amounts were.
Okay,
I mean,
amounts.
I'm happy to do
Yeah.
But if it takes a lot of time, I'm not trying to cause a lot of time. I just,
I'll talk to.
it's curiosity more than anything.
Correct contract amounts. I'll see what we can pull together.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll get a report. I'll get you.
I appreciate, I don't.
Take more than 5 minutes, but we can do.
It'll
that.
take a little-
Pull the numbers.
Okay. Vivian, go ahead.
Thank you. Hey, Bob. Yeah, I appreciate the figures you gave for surrounding districts and Milwaukee, just as a percentage of the budget that we do approve and vote on and formulate. We're already at the very, very lower bound, and even if we increase it by 15,000, it seems like we'd be at the lower bound for other districts with smaller budgets but higher thresholds. Sorry. I had my comment and then it just escaped me.
It's all right, Vivian, if
that.
you.
Say go higher. You were gonna say go higher, weren't you?
No, I was not gonna say.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, okay, no, I just wanted to clarify that the contracts going through for purchase, that amount was already approved by us, no, through the formal budget process? Like,
1,000.
Which number are you referring to, Vivian?
either way, like if it goes through the consent process, that dollar amount has already been like, the board approves a certain amount of expenditures per year through the budget process. And so that gets allocated to departments. And so they have that discretionary money to execute, the vision. So that money has already been allocated to them, no?
Correct,
Correct.
that's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So this is like a second level of approval then when you think about it that way. So even if we do increase it by 15, the board still has levers to course correct through the overall budget process if something below that threshold indicated that we were drifting away or violated our values or something like that. So thank you.
Thank you, Sabian. So what I'm hearing, just to recap, is that majority of folks are kind of like around the okay with the 50,000. We're looking for, per curiosity, some of the inflationary numbers in the past. And so it's like, that's where we're at right now. Any other questions about this policy? Okay. Y'all, let's move on to the last policy on the policy 8351, travel reimbursements. Go ahead.
I'll let Petra talk about this, I'm just kidding. So there's a lot of red line here, but I'll just quickly explain how the red line is going on. We have a policy that talks about travel reimbursement that we have not, let me say, we have an alternative procedure that we've been using to reimburse employees for travel. It's been going on for a few years. And what we're doing now is pretty much summarized in the language under 2 that we add. So this really is a board policy that we're updating to the steps and processes that have already been adopted by the district. And so that's why you see the red line through all the other stuff. Because we just do it based on federal reimbursement for mile set per diem on, but for this one, for travel, it's the federal IRS amount that we use. And I am like change, and this is actually also a topic we're talking in handbook. An improvement, I consider an improvement in policy is we would like employees to submit for reimbursement within a month after the month the travel has happened. So if they travel in the month of December, they have until the end of January to submit that reimbursement to their supervisor. The supervisor will then have a month to approve that. And we think that's beneficial to employees and to supervisors to be real clear on. We want you to get your reimbursement for your travel, get it done. We think it's reasonable, a whole month after the month, get your travel reimbursement in. And then specifying the supervisors, you got a month to take care of it.
I think
That's really what this is.
Well, and I would just add just one quick thing to what Bob had said, which is striking the language about the required minimums for insurance carried by the driver of a vehicle. The reason that was struck is because the language is duplicative. If you look at policy 8350, which is in regards to liability insurance / alternative method of providing transportation for students, that policy sets forth all these requirements. And one initiative that the policy committee is wanting to undertake, and this is at the advice of legal services, is to make sure that we're not being duplicative across policies, because that makes the administration and revision of policy over time more burdensome. So if for whatever reason the state passed something and that needed to change, we'd be having to look across policies versus one. So that's the reason for that language being struck.
Thank you for that that added explanation. Go ahead, Blair.
Can you repeat the name of the policy that you get it?
83.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the changes make perfect sense.
Maybe. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yes, in this policy. You have vetted a process. Which is the submission on a monthly basis. And that the supervisor gets an additional month. To me, that's internal processes. And since the board itself is not really in a position to monitor and or enforce the internal processes of employees, I guess I'm wondering that should be in here, or if that's something that is like more like guidance from the budget planning and accounting department out to employees. Because I think what I think about is, what if there was an employee who did not submit their mileage reimbursement on a monthly basis? They let it accumulate for several months because they're just too busy to get mileage form in. And just what if budget planning and accounting then decided, well, per board policy, you're out of compliance and we're gonna deny your reimbursement. And then now all of a sudden you have an employee filing a grievance because they actually did the travel. You know what I mean? So I think what I'm trying to think about is like, should that language actually be in the policy or not? Did you guys think about or discuss that?
We didn't discuss it.
There is a provision in the handbook that's very similar to this policy that we're discussing with MPI and the other unions about having the same language that appears in this policy. And really the way the handbook reads now, it says should be submitted within 2 months, the reimbursement, right? And so wanted to specify in the handbook, we're asking to specify what is the employee's responsibility and what is the supervisor's responsibility, still maintain that 2-month window of requested. The answer is, for President Nichols, if you don't submit it at time, you don't. Under the current. So that's why we're trying to specify, we're still maintaining a 2-month window, but we're specifying employees, you have a month to submit, then the end of the month that you travel. Supervisors, you have 1 month to approve it. He and the office to process the payment within 2 months of the month of travel.
I see.
And it's specified this way in the handbook.
So can I just, so we looked at a policy red line earlier this evening that just said shall be in accordance with the employee handbook. Would we use language that could be similar to that, or are you saying that this is something that really needs to be more delineated in policy to make it more
No,
effective?
I think that's a good point you're raising, or President, I think it's a good point.
Okay.
Okay, Blair and then Nikki.
I appreciate that too. Okay, staff member assigned to more than one school can be compensated for travel, but I'm wondering about like, what about people who are assigned to one school, but because of the nature of their work at that school are often traveling? Like, for example, special education teachers in adult transition programs who are going site to site, but are still, attached to one school. Or like, people who supervise students in youth apprenticeships who are making visits to the students' job sites wouldn't fall into this policy. And I'm just wondering about if that came up or if you thought about that. Right, because they're assigned to a school, but they're they travel in the course of performing their duties. Something like that.
A very good point. Cause I didn't, yeah. My answer, but I would have been, someone would ask me, do I get to be reimbursed for the travel you just grabbed? I would have said, of course you do.
It's just same, right? Like you have to go.
What?
do all this stuff, but it's not, it wouldn't fall under the policy. So, something to think about for the committee.
Under this policy or?
It's in the.
Is it?
Like, were you?
Well, I think
saying
that gets-
This policy, it wouldn't fit?
Right, cause it says a staff member assigned to more than one school shall be compensated, unless it's separate, right? Like. Like, the second part would say. The district shall reimburse employees in such a way. To each employee required by the district to drive their personal vehicle during the course of, so I guess, is it both? So the second part would cover someone who's, for example, going to visits for youth apprenticeships or adult transition. But the first, I don't know. I don't personally feel like I need to do that part, but it's just popping up to me.
Okay,
I'm not following.
I see the item, you're talking about item number 1.
Yeah.
It wasn't redlined.
Yeah.
And I had missed.
Yeah, yes,
Redlined.
thank you. Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Ali?
Uh,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Nikki, and then Ali.
Just, briefly, I happen to agree with Michelle. We could just say this is a handbook issue. My other problem that I have with this is that I fear it will burden our HR department because it's not just staff I worry about, but everything must be processed within 1 month. I think right now that might overburden our HR at the same time. And I think that could be an absolute hardship on them because it says that people won't get reimbursed if it's not in. Well, they may have done it, and if HR is swamped and doesn't get to it, this is gonna cause a lot of issues.
Yeah, it's an online form that can be submitted by the employees. Back when it's submitted, it's my team that.
Okay, that makes more sense. Cause I was assuming it supervisor, I was thinking the HR department, then I'm going, do we really wanna burden that? And that's what my fear was. So thank you for clarifying that. That's really much more helpful.
Ali?
Thanks, Maya. I am curious about how you factor state statute into this in terms of our reimbursement related to private school transportation. And so I very much appreciate that we're talking about employees and that we're talking about, something that aligns with our current handbook. I think that makes this an easy policy to vote in favor of. I really appreciate the nuance of the conversation. But my understanding is that state statute dictates that we reimburse people whose children attend private school for their mileage relating to transporting their own students, and that people have until the end of the year to collect that reimbursement from us if their student is supposed to attend our district. Is that correct?
So there's a separate policy.
Ali, I think that is 2 policies that we're talking about. The policy that we're talking about right now is just the policies for how staff are reimbursed when they drive down their cars or when they're going outside for traveling. That's a totally different separate policy.
I guess I am asking about that policy because I'm wondering why, like, we have that standard as if I'm correct in my description of that policy. I'm wondering why we have that standard as it relates to state statute in which people can accumulate that cost over the course of the school year and then submit a reimbursement for the total amount at the end of the year. I guess I'm curious, is there a reason why we couldn't echo that process as it relates to staff? So if to Nichelle's point, if someone's traveling really consistently and they're keeping track of it and it's easier to do it all at once or to do it every semester, is there a reason we'd want to stay away from that kind of flexibility as it relates to this mileage reimbursement versus per state statute? Is there a difference in terms of how we're handling reimbursement related to transportation for private school?
So
I-
giving
So
it-
I'm wondering if, Ali, if we could take your question as an admin team, because I think we need to be better suited to answer that question by reviewing the process of that particular policy that you're talking about against this one, so we can have another answer. So my recommendation is that we bring that back at the next time when we review this particular policy.
Dr. McGray, I greatly appreciate that. And I think I do understand that these are different realities and we get to hold our staff to a different standard. But I think if we already are equipped to take on the accumulative cost of transportation or mileage reimbursement for some populations, I'm just curious about what it looks like to apply that to our faculty and staff. And so I greatly appreciate your willingness to look into it, and hopefully it doesn't create too much work for anyone.
My initial gut is telling me just the amount of doing it that way where it's open-ended, just what that capacity of workload will be for our finance department, it is a great team, but it is a small and nimble team. And so and just the amount of employees that we do have with mileage it's very different. But I would rather us pull the data so we can really have that conversation. But initially, that's what my gut is telling me, our huge thing is gonna be the amount of individuals that's working to do these processes, because it's still, some of it is a manual piece of it. So I would just rather us have that conversation to review it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I do understand that we have to take into consideration and factor capacity to fulfill this work in a timely manner and the limitations of our capacity related to this particular body of work. So thank you for being willing to review kind of the relevant data and bring it back to us.
Great question, I'll lead, thank you. Any other comments about this policy? Go ahead, Nikki.
That's, Ali's questions actually spurred a question in me, because I'm worried that the optics of the situation, we will pay for private schools, you have until the end of the year. But if you are a teacher or a custodian who's working a certain number of shifts or teacher or staff, not necessarily custodian, who's working a certain number of shifts and doesn't get it in on time, they're held to a stricter standard. Seems almost punitive, but maybe I'm wrong and maybe I'm missing something. And I could take it as I'm probably missing something. But any suggestions would, because I just don't want it to seem like we're punishing our staff. That's my only, well,
Well, maybe as board members, we can each go back and just even look at what's currently in the employee handbook. Because I know when Bob was saying this would cross-reference the employee handbook. If our employees are looking at the handbook as a way to navigate through the district for a variety of ways, it might be good for us to also look at currently stated in our handbook, and then come back to this policy. And and do you all as the policy committee feel like you have enough reaction?
Yes.
From that?
I think so.
Yes.
I think we're good. Thank you, Michelle, for offering.
Yeah.
I'll go next. Okay, that is the last policy for this policy review meeting. Give you guys a round of applause.
Thank you to the policy committee for all of your work to get us these set of policies. And I will also, I know Blair said this earlier, but I just wanna congratulate the policy committee and congratulate us as a board for trying out a new structure, which is, we
which is
agreed in
working nicely.
2025 that we would kind of designated a little quarterly meeting to try to accelerate us getting through more policies at one time. So thank you for giving us such a successful first run.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We'll figure out what the next steps are for all of these. And with that, I will hand it back. Did you have to say something? Oh,
All
I'll
right.
hand it over to Board President Nichols.
Thank you. All right, the second item tonight is a discussion of the Forward Career and College Academy Charter Proposal. As a reminder, this item tonight is not to indicate how a board member intends to vote. We will actually take that action on Monday night. This is really a discussion item grounded in the proposal that we received, the feedback about the proposal, and any follow-up questions that we may have wanted to raise tonight. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Gothard and Dr. McCray.
Thank you very much, President Nichols, members of the board. We are going to just simply give a bit of a recap on the process and what we have done to this date to get you, or to prepare you to prepare all for Monday night's deliberation and eventual vote. So I'll ask Dr. McCray to just outline briefly the process, the documents perhaps that you have in front of you tonight, the new one. I want to definitely give you some context on the CTE overview that we provided. TJ, if you could take it from there.
Good evening. So this evening, we are here just to allow the board to engage in a conversation around the current charter school application that we have in front of us. The organization has submitted the proposal via our board policy that we have and met all of the timelines that we have already outlined. Each board members have that actual proposal. In addition to that, we provided them with some feedback that is also in front of you that includes a workbook mock-up for what this school could look like. In addition to that, you will see that they did provide some feedback to the feedback, and so you have that in front of you too. So if you want to engage in those things that you're having this conversation this evening. Finally, as Dr. Gothard highlighted, we did prepare a document that really looks at what CTE looks like for us as a district and where we are and what we're doing in our CTE world. And so we wanted our board members to also be able to have that information as we're beginning to engage in this conversation. And then finally, just as Board President Nichols stated, the vote part of our procedure will happen at our February general board meeting where the board will take action on. So tonight it's just allowed you to engage in the conversation.
Point of order question?
Yes.
Will the, as these are public documents, now will the public be able to see them on board docs, or how does that work in a workshop?
I'm gonna have to get back to Steve because I need to ask. Because I don't want to.
I understand, that's why
I'll follow.
that's fine.
I'll turn it over to the board to engage in the conversation.
Okay, so let's see here. We know that we received a proposal. There was feedback that the administration provided based on a rubric that is used to kind of score and look at different components of the proposal. And that was done not by an individual, but a committee of folks.
Correct.
Okay. And then that information was shared with the proposing organization back to Forward Career and College Academy, Career and College Academy, okay. And then they didn't have to, but they also took the opportunity to respond to the feedback that they received.
Correct.
Okay, so that you have, and that document is dated from February 13th. And there they provide some additional responses to the administration's kind of analysis on the proposal. The sample school allocation is an attempt to look at what we would require if the school were to be an instrumentality based on what the Forward Career and College Academy said on the 150 ninth graders. Year one.
And
So,
maybe- I
yeah,
just want to think like there are other roles that we might not see, so you gotta think like custodian, you need to think of like food service, like, so there are some things that are not showing up on this one. But there are some additional responsibilities and roles that we will also need to fold into the school in order for it to be rolled out. So just want to put that in your mind too.
yeah. And then the career and technical education flyer or document that you all put together provides board members with more insight on kind of what we do have going on with career and technical education. And I'm assuming in some ways we're getting this, which is helpful because in the proposal, I think there was a kind of a strong assertion that we weren't doing anything, and there were kind of references to something at the state level that said we had like 0% of, I don't remember if it was work-based, something.
Industry credentials.
Industry credentials. Okay, so this gives us a little bit more perspective on what we do have happening.
And just as a reminder of it, is that we tried to correct that issue with DPI. However, because the issue it's an older issue, we're unable to go back and correct it once we reported to it. So we tried to update that, and we've been doing a lot of internal work to make sure that our reporting structures are set up properly by meeting and just making sure our data is clean. But we were unable to correct that, so I just want to make sure we know that that is incorrect, but we are unable to correct it with.
Great, so I guess I'll open it up to see if there are comments or questions about any of the documents presented. Yes.
I
Claire.
really appreciate that, that information about the error in the state provided data. I'm really proud of the way that our CTE programs within University High School are growing. I know that students who are attending our comprehensive high schools have access to work-based learning that is getting better every year. And I think that there's like with the state data, that information is not always out there. And so for me, when I hear community support for a charter school that would offer work-based learning and internships, I understand it. And I would say to people who say, hey, this sounds great, like, this does sound great, and we have it right now in MSD schools. Go talk to your school counselor because they know how to get you hooked up. And I think that really matters. The other thing that I think has been coming up for me through this process is twofold. One is like, without discounting the applicant's desire to see innovative things happening, I think that there's a misconception about what goes into running a high school for hundreds of students. And I think the sample allocation here sort of like elucidates that. Like, there's so much that goes into making it possible for an adolescent. No, I think this is it, right? Like, it's easy to do it for one, right? For one student, for 2 students, for 10 students, sure, right? Like, you can kind of like homebrew something that functions to serve those students. But we don't have 10, right? We have thousands, hundreds and thousands, like not hundreds of thousands, we have hundreds and then thousands. And like the what we provide in comprehensive high schools in a full district that has so many supports, I think can't be understated, and it's not always seen. Partly because it's not always everybody's business, right? Like the amount of work that school social workers do to support a student who's struggling to get to school. Like you don't talk about it, right? Like they're not supposed to talk about it. It's not anybody's business. But when people whose experience of school is being a student or having a kid in school, you're missing that context of like what really goes into it. And I think that's important to bring up. And then the other thing I think that's coming up for me is like an understanding of what's getting in the way. And when I look at this application, a lot of the rhetoric is about like, kids just need to believe, they need to be shown that they can do it, that there's opportunities. And while I believe and like live my life working in schools, like building students up to that, there are also barriers that are significantly beyond what a student thinks is possible. Again, I'm going to bring up transportation, housing instability, all of these things that get in the way of a student's ability to take advantage of an internship. That to me, especially right now, especially as our broader political situation is like consistently undercutting the supports that people need to get to just like live dignified lives. I think it's important that people not be discounting those. And then I guess the last thing that's on my mind about it is like, no, I'll leave it there. So those are the kinds of things that are on my mind as I'm reading through this application and thinking about the existing programs in MMSD that we've been investing in, that have been growing, that have been successful. That I mean, like more partnerships are always welcome, but I don't see the innovation and I don't see the expanding access, which for me are the main things. So that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Thank you, Blair. Other board members have any responses, questions, or comments from the documents that we have been immersed in so far? Yes, Board Member Muldrow.
Thank you, Board President Nichols. I'm really sorry I can't be there in person tonight. I'm incredibly sick. But I think that this is one of the most important conversations we're gonna get to have, is really teasing apart this proposal. I have to admit that I was really disappointed by the final proposal because I felt like questions I asked really early on in the process were not addressed in terms of the size of the school, where these students are coming from, and the implications of where this school will be located, right? If this is a school that's going to serve the entire city, I think working in partnership with our district to discuss what it means to have a centrally located high school is a relevant factor. So I guess I want to ask our administration how responsive the team putting together this proposal was to questions board members raised early on, and why that information is not included in the final proposal. And obviously, I know that you didn't write the proposal, so it's not on you. I'm just curious if there's an explanation.
I think it's hard to answer that question on why the questions were not answered in the final proposal, because we really did not engage in conversations about the proposal after we provide them with the feedback. So I think it's also critical to just remember that we provided them the feedback, thinking about some of the things that the board voiced at the meeting, and we shared that feedback for them prior to them creating the final proposal. And so all we can do is just provide the feedback to them and hope that they incorporate it. And that's the standard process that we've done with all of our charters. We did the same thing with Badger Rock. We did the same thing with Nostrumundo by giving them opportunity to submit it when it was in draft form, provide them feedback, and then providing it again and then giving them the final feedback.
Yeah, so I will say like the location and number of students is one of the more concerning components of this proposal, and I didn't feel like I gained a lot of clarity um around those aspects of the proposal. I also want to lift what board member Mosner Feltham said, which is these opportunities exist within our district, and so it feels like we would be creating duplicative opportunities. And I think that there's some real missed opportunity in expanding access to opportunities or strengthening opportunities that maybe the district hasn't already developed programming around. And so I find this proposal hard to um, support at this point because I feel that it's missing some really foundational information in terms of how this would work. I also want to say that we've seen 2X charters really struggle um, at the high school level, at the secondary level, and you know, we've seen multiple 2X charters shut down their high school programming, and so I agree completely with my board colleague who said, this is a tremendous undertaking, and you know, it's something that has to be done with a great deal of integrity in order for it to work well. Otherwise, it destabilizes students who are really, really looking for a solution to being successful at school. Bob, I have some curiosity about um, what this will cost the district. We're a 2X charter with 600 students. To pull a significant number of that 600 students from our district going into the 2025-2026 school year.
Sure, that's a difficult question to answer because of the lack of specificity of where the school is gonna be located, first. So I'll talk about how revenues work in the state funding formulas. And in order to get a really clear picture on that, we really need to know if they're gonna start with 100, how many students they have, whether the students are currently enrolled in metropolitan. If they're currently enrolled in Madison Metropolitan School District, we get 0 new revenues, and it becomes an issue of whatever it's gonna cost the school is all cost, right? No additional revenues generated, just new costs. So we'd have to come up with where you're gonna run the cost, right? If all 150 students are new, never been enrolled in Madison School District and move into the district, the way revenue limits work is we would get revenues per child of about 14,400 this year. But it would only be 1/3 of that revenue because revenue limits are 3-year average. So you'd have full-time costs the first year and only 1/3 of the revenue cover those costs. The costs are or above that. If they're coming from other districts under open enrollment, you get about $9,000 expendable revenue. But that would be the only new revenue we would generate. And so that's kind of how the high level numbers work.
I greatly appreciate that explanation, and I do hope that we can really refine some level of protection around the financial implications of this school becoming either an instrumentality or a 2X charter. I think that's a major factor in how this board moves forward in discussing this proposal. The last thing I want to acknowledge is that we heard a lot of support for this school in public comment recently. And the racial demographics of folks we heard that support from were folks who for the majority part identified as African American and Black. And so I do think there's a need to acknowledge that our district has to strengthen our approach to working with students of color, but to particularly serving our Black students. And at the same time, I want to recognize that there is a predatory dynamic of coming into a district like ours and saying that you are going to resolve something as deep rooted as racialized inequity through a school that pairs young people with professional opportunities. I think there's a lot of complexity in the conversation about how this proposal is leveraging the race dynamics of our community. And I am curious if our administration wants to acknowledge that dynamic and speak to the work that we're doing to ensure that all students, but specifically students who have been historically underserved by our district, um, are getting their needs met. And, I think I have a great deal of compassion for families who are coming forward to us and saying, what you all are doing isn't working for my kid and I need something else. And I want people to know that we hear that. And we are willing to work together and work with them to address it.
So, Board Member Muldrow, thank you for the question. I'll start with a response. Can you hear me okay? Okay, perfect. It's Cindy, by the way, in case you can't see. So I think there are a couple of responses that I would provide to that. First is the CTE kind of quick facts or fact sheets that we provided does provide a breakdown in terms of who we currently are serving across all of our schools as it relates to these opportunities. And there is definitely proportionate ratios in terms of students, specifically Black as well as other student groups compared to our overall district demographic data. So I think we are doing a good job in terms of getting students the opportunities that they deserve. In addition to that, I mean, we can always, do better and improve. We are also ensuring that these opportunities exist beyond our 4 comprehensive high schools. And so that is an important factor. So Capitol High, if everyone recalls, has a culinary CTE program, has a health science CTE program, and also we have a strong partnership with Madison College for other areas that they cannot do on their campuses. Capitol High happens to serve about 80 to 90% of students of color, so they're getting a great opportunity there. Shabazz also has these opportunities, and then IAE, which is our Innovative Alternative Education Programs. We have really done that in the last 2 years to ensure, again, regardless of what school or program our students are in, that they are receiving these opportunities. So the internships, this is where our partners come in and are really important because IAE doesn't have the facility in their site, but they are working in collaboration. And then we've also been able to do, though more minimal, at our metro, we have 4 divisions that we serve, and we've done a lot of career exploration and been able to bring in some exposure there. So I think we're trying to ensure across all 8 of our high school spaces that students are receiving these opportunities. I do think as a system, there are infrastructure barriers and other barriers for the access that we have to continue to work through. But I think the team and myself are really proud of the work over the last 5 years that has grown. And just again, some of the quick data points here show that we are continuing to do it. And I'll remind the board of the presentation we did in October, which really showed both cost saving measures that we've been able to provide to students and families, as well as kind of a highlight about what happens in the summer when students have much more free time and the number of paid internships we've been able to provide. And that's really in collaboration with our CBOs, our community partners, and the city. So just another mention of where we think this work has really grown.
Okay, I see, her heart response. Savion or Board Member Castro, I believe I saw your hand up a little while ago. Did you still wanna make a comment? Or ask a question?
Yeah, I guess 2 broad comments and maybe a question. I just wanted to, well, I guess 3. Yeah, I wanted to thank everyone involved in this process. I think at the end of the day, we can all agree we want to have an education system that meets the needs of every child and improves access and opportunity. So I value that base value from all of us. Um, Having said that, just about the application in general, I have been concerned by the kind of seemingly evolving leadership from the folks submitting the application. Some of the backgrounds of some members of the leadership team do not necessarily fit with the philosophy of education that we have. So I wanted to get that off the bat. And I think fundamentally, there was just a misalignment here. That doesn't mean that this has to be the final missed opportunity, but I do think that there is a fundamental misalignment in terms of how the school would fit into our more broad district plans and misunderstanding of services that we already provide, especially boosted up services from the passage of the past two referenda and spaces in our high school to provide more CTE. And also when I think about some of our more successful partnerships, they have kind of started small and then we scaled up further. For example, when it comes to enrollment, meeting their enrollment goals, I was kind of suspicious on how they would meet that, especially if some of the students came disproportionately from what high school, what that would mean to the viability for that one high school, kind of uncertainty about the instructional design and staffing as well, whether that would be additive or duplicative. It just seems like there is more opportunity to figure out where the holes are and the services that we provide. So yeah, that's my general first thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Castro. Board Member Simkin, you don't have to. Do you have anything you want to share tonight or ask? Okay, great.
Yep, I can speak. I don't really have any questions. I'll just share a little bit about my impression of the proposal. When I was reading it, it left me with a lot of questions that I'm not going to ask right now because they're questions of the group that submitted the proposal. And a lot of them fell into the category of how are the students' academic, social and emotional needs going to be met within this framework? Looking at the proposed curriculum, I couldn't see a justification for how those curriculums were chosen. I also was and am very unclear on the idea that the first year in ninth grade that students would be moved up to grade level academic work and then go on from there. I would have loved to know how that was anticipated that would be taking place. Since that's something that is a district and I'd say as a country that we're struggling with. And so there wasn't detail to describe how that was going to happen. There wasn't really anything in the proposal about students with different learning needs. And so students who either had IEPs or were identified as advanced learners were not acknowledged throughout the proposal. And we have a large number of students that fit into those categories. And so I would assume there'd be a within the school that would fit into those categories. And it didn't talk about meeting needs as far as curriculum or supportive adult within the program. And then that led me to wonder, there wasn't a budget attached to it. And so it's my impression of the proposal is that it's very ambitious and that it would take significant funding structure to be able to meet all of the students' needs academically, socially, emotionally, that it would be a high intensity staffing situation, but weren't provided with that information. So I was left with a lot of curiosity about that. That's my feedback.
Thank you. Well, I will also say a few things. Work with me for a minute as I share this. Reading this proposal and being presented with the opportunity to think about whether or not we're wanting to move into a charter school, another charter school, it made me think about the 2 charter renewals that this current board has recently engaged in. We recently renewed Badger Rock, and we recently renewed Nuestra Mundo. That's all been within the last year. And of course, renewing a charter school is very different than approving a startup charter school, which led me oddly down the road of thinking about, I wonder what it looked like when Nuestro Mundo first began. That charter school is an instrumentality of ours and is like 20 years old. But 20 years ago, they would have been coming to the district, right, with a proposal. And I went back on their website, went back and found older articles, and there were some things that were distinctly unique when Nuestro Mundo decided to form and propose a charter school. What I found in some of the archives is that the community of Madison had changed very dramatically in the late 1990s. We had a huge migration from Mexico, Central and South America. And guess what? That meant our Madison School District was not well equipped or staffed to actually serve our Spanish-speaking children and families very well. The families then decided to start, and probably staff of MMSD, started meeting about what would be a better way to address this need, because we're probably going to see more families moving to Madison. And at that time, they went beyond just looking at like English as a second language. They looked at dual language immersion. It was a practice that at the time MMSD did not have. And they spent a couple of years actually forming their nonprofit, a couple of years in the community, meeting with parents about this potential new school and would they even send their children to a dual language immersion school. They were meeting with community leaders. They were fundraising. Like, you can see the work they did from about 2000 to 2004. They worked with board members. They worked with existing school. They actually were working with La Follette High School staff because they wanted the school to be located in that attendance area and wanted to have some sense of what it would look like for students to move up into to their feeder high school. So I was like looking at all of the ground community work. And when they came forward to the school district and the school board at that time, their proposal was to start with a kindergarten class. I don't remember the size of the class. It might have been 90 students, 75. I don't remember, but it was to start with an initial class and they would grow each year, adding a grade level, right? And they were a school in a school. They were actually housed in Frank Alice Elementary School. And their first charter school contract with the district had them in one of our schools as an instrumentality. And then upon the second charter renewal, some 5 years later, they were starting to burst at the seams because of really great enrollment. And Frank Alice was also bursting at the seams and said, like, we could kind of use some of that space back. And that's when New Western Mundo ended up moving to a lease space in Monona Grove at, I think it's Nichols, at Nichols School. But anyway, and then it's odd that they're back in the Frank Alice building now, kind of in the building to themselves. So I share that to say, reading this charter proposal kind of put me back in the mindset of like, what does it look like when an organization has an idea for an unmet need in our district, and that could bring something forward and innovative that maybe we haven't tried yet. So I opened up this proposal actually looking for a vision that I could see on paper. And I appreciate all of the work that has gone in to writing the proposal. I don't think it's an easy thing to write a proposal and to spend a lot of time envisioning every aspect of what a school needs to have. And for me, and I used our own district rubric, there were just components within the proposal that didn't give me enough detail. And it was not in one or two areas, it was in several of the areas. And it did leave me asking way more questions about what's the curricular model, what is the kind of the master's schedule for students. I kind of got a good sense of the curriculum, but there were just some things overall that I was left with more questions about. And I think to your point, Board Member Simkin, because there wasn't a budget, which I could imagine if you're not inside the district, it might be hard to come up with a budget, you know what I mean, for an instrumentality school. But because I couldn't see a budget, it was also hard to imagine how the staffing that was in the proposal would work within our larger system. I think for me as a board member, you know, one of the things that we also, for me, there's one of the things is considering is like, is there an area that our current system, our current programming does not provide? And is a charter, an instrumentality charter, an opportunity to try something? So I tried to read it in that spirit. And I think I was still left with way more questions than potential answers about how that could work. I also think in a system that's as large as ours, you know, when you're looking at the strategies for recruitment, the strategies for enrollment in the proposal, that didn't end up feeling as clear to me either about where the students were coming from. Would we be, if we were to implement this as an instrumentality, are we taking students from our 4, 5, 6 schools and trying to get them into this new offering? Are they, yeah, it was just it was a little harder to imagine exactly how it would fit in our larger system. So but I do want to just say I appreciate the time that went into writing the proposal. I appreciated the public comment. You know, one of the things that I have noticed is that I kind of have been checking my emails even since the public comment, looking to see if there has been more student or family demand. Kind of going back to what I had seen and what Nuestro Mundo had when they first started. And I haven't seen that in my inbox. So I don't have a sense that there's a lot of folks asking for this. But that's not to negate the power of the public comment a while ago. And I will just conclude by saying I do also appreciate the administration, like your time reading, providing feedback, and also being able to come up with like some facts about what we are providing and what we're not. And where there's opportunities to continue to strengthen our own district. I will say recently, you know, just kind of looking at the educational landscape, I think there is a lot of conversation, not unique to this charter proposal or MMSD. I just think in the educational landscape, there's a lot of language about our public schools being places that prepare our students to go directly into the workforce. I think lots of districts have been investing more in career and technical education, but I'm hearing more and more of like, there may be a prioritization of dollars at the federal level towards this idea of students being able to go from high school graduation directly into potentially high earning jobs and or filling gaps in the workforce that currently exist around kind of these skilled trades. So I guess given that that might be where the educational landscape is going, I can understand why maybe this proposal is coming forward, because it's I think there's more of that kind of talk around the importance of our public schools serving that purpose as well. And you know, again, I'll just say that I guess as I read the proposal and used our own rubric to think critically about what was being proposed, I just was left with more questions. But I do think that regardless of how the board votes on Monday night, I think that we have got to, as a district, be thinking about there are lots of students in our district that, like, it's not that they're not capable of going to college. That's just not the thing they want to do. And there are students who want to be able to get out there and make money, and to feel like they've got a kind of a natural progression right into what could be a decent paying job right after school that doesn't require a degree. And I think the more that we can bolster those opportunities in our district, and I think it is critical, because I think more and more students, there are more numbers of students who want those opportunities, not just a pathway to a 2 or 4 year college. Yes.
Madam
Claire.
President, I appreciate your thoughtfulness so much. And I'm gonna say a couple of things, not necessarily specifically in response to this proposal, but in response to some of the ideas that you brought up as we're thinking about the future direction of ST schools. Like your little history tour was so helpful. And it made me think about how like the way charters function has also changed significantly over that time.
Yes.
And like, if you think about the intention of a school district being able to charter a school 30 years ago, that is no longer the only thing that charters are being used to. And like I said, I'm not talking necessarily about this proposal, right? I'm not casting accusations about this group necessarily. But I am saying that we're in a context where the existence of public schools, not just high schools, but public schools generally, is being challenged with a lot of money behind it and a lot of political sophistication behind it, using ideas like choice or parents' rights that are actually masks for dismantling public education. Again, not talking about this proposal, but I do think that we should not naively assume that like that's never present around us. So I wanted to offer that. For anybody who's listening, like I was like my like first full-time teaching job was at a charter school in Oakland. Like I loved that school. I loved my students. I think I was a new teacher, so I'm sure I made a lot of mistakes. But I did good work for my students. We learned together, we grew together. So I understand why people are seeking other things, but I do think that sometimes that desire can be that can lack the full analysis, which I think I appreciate us bringing here. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to talk about is like going directly from high school into the workforce, which I support for any student who wants to do that. And I want to be a district that can prepare any student for that if that's what they want. That said, being prepared to go out into the workforce after high school is totally different than like spending the majority of our high school experience working. And I bring that up because there's just a difference between preparation for work and work. And like we have child labor laws because poor children historically have been forced to work and not get their education. And so as we're thinking about moving towards being able to say, yeah, you can graduate from an MSD high school ready to work and ready to get paid when you graduate, which makes it all the more important that in high school you have robust access to arts, to music, to social emotional learning, to community building with your neighbors, not less of that, right? Like they have to go together. So I wanted to bring that up. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up that I'm thinking about as you're taking us on this history tour is gone from my brain. So I talked about like the way what happens around a charter proposal is different now than it used to be.
Very much so.
Oh, I remember, right. So I was looking back at our board norms and like a norm I think that we all share, which is taking student-centered leadership, students at the center. And I think that sometimes when we're talking about choices, it can be tempting to be like, well, we know there's a group of students in MMSD in this city right now who need X. And therefore responding to that need right now, X, is the student-centered choice. But I also think about how much effort we put into and energy and thinking we put into what our sustainability goals are. And I think that we can extrapolate from our environmental sustainability goals to like what makes a school district sustainable in this political climate right now. And like taking student-centered leadership and making student-centered choices doesn't just mean these 25 or 26,000 students. It also means the 25 or 26,000 students who are going to MMSD schools 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now. Just like we need to make sure that they have the facilities that can support that, we need to make sure that they have the public education infrastructure to support them. And that is the last thing I wanted to say. I remembered it. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I want to just say, thank you for highlighting that the chartering process is much different than even the example I gave from Nuestro Mundo coming to the district some 20 years ago, right? And yeah, we are in a different environment altogether. And I also want to just say my comments about my guess that there are young people in our district right now that would like some additional opportunities to be able to kind of graduate and get right into a good paying industry or sector. I want to clarify that I think even on this fact sheet, the fact that we are providing as many industry certifications as we are is a great start. I mean, we've done really good work, and all I was saying is we should also just be mindful that we probably do have more students that really want these opportunities, and so we need to think about how we increase access and opportunity to them. Let me just say this without belaboring the night, but I want to say this because I know this is on our MMSD Board of Education YouTube. So we have, Cindy, you're gonna have to help me up.
Yeah.
What is the ASE certified tech?
That's for autos. That's in order to get the full certification for industry for automobiles.
Okay, so we have an auto certified tech certification program, is it considered?
Yes, it is a autos program, and we have autos at all 4 of our county high schools now through our REF 2020 and continuing to work through so that they're all you have to go through a certification process like from the outside organization to get cleared. So we're working on making sure that happens so that every student in one of those schools that wants to take it can get the ASE certification.
Beautiful. We have the Certiport Software Development
That's
or
correct.
ITS.
Yep, so for information technology. It's a credentialing for information technology. For the infrastructure side of it, more of like the coding, the hardware side.
Great. We offer nursing assistant.
Yep, CNA.
Yep, CNA. We offer an NCCER construction.
So that's
Industry.
construction. So back to some of the conversations around the trades, that's an opportunity for students through our construction labs to earn a credential in the area of construction. So the woodworking, beginning stages of future construction.
We have a phlebotomy lab tech
Yes,
industry cert.
that's in our health sciences.
That one's got fewer students. I wonder why, because the phlebotomists, they draw the blood, don't they?
Because it's
Yeah.
relative.
Also, you have to have a
Relatively
special
new. So we only
for
just
that.
got it started last year, so it's relatively new.
Okay,
And maybe people might not be interested in blood.
all right, project lead the way.
Sure, so this is in our biotech stuff, so for students that are interested in going into biotech or biohealth, it's a project lead the way, it's also a college credit bearing course, so you both earn both your industry certification as well as college credit.
Okay, serve safe food handler and a serve safe food manager.
Sure, so these are in our culinary program, so we have culinary 1, 2, and then we go into Pro Start, and these are certifications that are in culinary program.
Okay. Very nice. And then we also get to see the courses that are being offered. Across, and these are across all of the high schools, correct? Or just the 4 comprehensives?
So it depends, like barbering right now is not offered across all of our high schools. It's
Okay.
Mostly at East, it came through our.
I remember that.
Yeah, so through our ESSER funds, and we are continuing to work on growing that, so students have access to the internship. So that one is not off across the board.
And can you say anything about the current state of our youth apprenticeship?
Yeah.
Just since we're talking about what we do provide.
Yeah, so youth apprenticeship is all the way at the kind of like end of what we think about in terms of work-based experience for students. So it starts with like job shadowing opportunities, guest speakers, internships, and then youth apprenticeship is all the way at the end for students that really want to experience the full hands-on experience in a particular career field. So their senior year, they spend 450 hours of their school time working in that career area on the job, like job site, working and training. And then at the end of that youth apprenticeship, they're earning an apprenticeship opportunity so they could go straight into a registered apprenticeship right afterwards or launch right into that career. Currently, we have about 60 students that are in youth apprenticeship across all of our high schools. And that's more than doubled in the last few years. I don't know if you recall, but
Remember?
maybe we were at around 25. We're
Yeah.
continuing to grow.
Okay,
You know, there's many reasons why students might never make it to that full end of the work-based learning experience, but yeah, we have about 60 students. Career fields, we've got the fleet through the city of Madison. We've got some in the health science. We've got one student doing physical therapy that is interested over at UW. Students, a wide range of opportunities for our students.
okay. It's interesting. I was on the Findorf site recently. And I noticed they had a youth apprenticeship little button on their website, and I wasn't sure if it was like, ooh, is that in connection with
Yes.
our district exclusively or just generally?
It started
the local,
through,
yeah.
it started through the Ref 2020, and we had said we also want to make sure that you get females and students of color. So there's you know, a growing need for females in the construction area, and so Jim Yealy, who's, you know, the head of Findorf, really made that commitment, and so we hired 3 youth apprentices that have been working, and I don't know the number we have this year, but that all was another amazing opportunity that came through Ref 2020. I know board member Mosner Feltham, you talk about that a lot in terms of the experiences that students can also learn from the construction of our stuff. So that was one of those really cool opportunities that we started.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for making sure that we can speak more poignantly about what we are providing. Thanks to my colleagues tonight for engaging in just some thoughtful discussion, not only about policies, but about the charter proposal, and look forward to taking action on this on Monday night. I'm assuming are we okay for tonight in terms of conducting our business? All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Board Member Mosner Feltham, and Board Member
Second.
seconded. All those in favor of adjournment.
Aye.
All right, thank you, Ali. Hope you feel better. Meeting adjourned.
Thanks,
y'all.
y'all.